Mercy was always described to Guinevere as a gift granted by the strong, but the truth she had learned in 22 hard years was sharper and colder. Mercy was usually a bargain, and bargains were only offered when someone had already measured the value of your body against their fear. Pack sang about honor under moonlight, about kinship written in blood and bone, yet when winter hunger met border graves and leaders began counting losses, honor thinned like old cloth. The first thing sacrificed was always the outcast. The second was truth. By the time they fastened treaty chains around her wrists, she understood exactly which offering she had become. The dark hollow great hall rose from the mountain like a carved wound, all black timber and slate, its vaulted ribs held by iron bands stamped with old conquest marks. Heat rolled off braziers lining the central aisle, but the warmth never reached her skin. Two of her birth pack escorts walked her forward by the chain coupler at her back, as if she were a stubborn animal, one on each side, their formal cloaks still carrying the red dye of her family crest. Neither would meet her eyes. "Head down," said Elder Rowan Bloodmoon, voice flat with practiced dismissal. "You are here because your life can still purchase use." Guinevere kept her head up anyway. Her cheek still ached where a guard had struck her at the gates for posture correction, and dried salt from old tears tightened the corners of her mouth. But she would not bow before she understood the room. 100 wolves watched from tiered benches and standing rails, warriors in leather and fur, covenant devotees with ash-gray cords wrapped around their forearms, court attendants with polished throat guards. At the far end stood the dais and a high-backed seat carved from a single trunk of dark oak, empty beneath the banner of Dark Hollow. No king, no queen, only power without a face. Then she saw him. He stood half in shadow beneath a pillar to the right of the dais, stripped down to the plain gear of a senior soldier, no sigil, no ornaments, only a scar crossing his jaw, and another pale line disappearing under his collar. Broad shoulders, stillness like a drawn blade. When she entered, his attention locked on her with a force that made the nape of her neck tighten, then slipped away as though he had remembered himself. Common soldier, she told herself. Dangerous, perhaps. Not hers. Nothing here is yours. The herald stepped forward and struck his staff once. Guinevere Bloodmoon, surrendered under mountain ceasefire terms as living tribute for service, labor, or culling by Dark Hollow discretion before moonrise. The words entered her like sleet. Service, labor, or culling. 3 pretty names for the same thing. Ownership ending in death if the buyer grew bored. Her escort shoved her to her knees for inspection. Iron bit deeper into the raw rings around her wrists. She swallowed the sound that rose in her throat when metal scraped bone. Lachlan Dark Hollow descended from the left stair then, clothed in ceremonial black, silver ash painted in a vertical line from brow to mouth. He moved like a priest who had learned warfare and found he preferred the first form of control. His smile did not reach his eyes. "Blood Moon sends us their blemish and calls it diplomacy," he said, loud enough for the benches. How reverent, how convenient. Low laughter rippled across the lower tier. Guinevere felt the old heat of humiliation try to climb her spine, and with it, something fiercer, a refusal that had survived every quiet cruelty of her pack. She did not look away from Lachlan. He crouched before her and lifted her chin with 2 fingers, inspecting as one might inspect grain. Any hidden mark, any false scent, any warding charm and treaty protection evaporates. You understand? "I understand you needed a woman in chains to feel lawful," she said. For one beat his expression slipped. Not anger. Pleasure. "Bring Fen." The murmur in the hall shifted to expectation. Heavy claws clicked on stone behind her, then a shape emerged from the side arch that stole breath from the room. Warwolf. Massive, Scarred across muzzle and shoulder, black fur shot with iron gray, left ear torn, amber eyes older than some kingdoms. Chainless, unmuzzled. The kind of beast commanders pointed at enemy lines when they wanted survivors to remember fear. Fen stopped a pace from her and lowered his head, nostrils widening. Guinevere could smell him now beneath smoke and sweat. Wild grass after rain, old leather, wolf musk, the copper edge of healed injury. Lachlan spread one hand toward her like a host presenting a dish. Test her. Guinevere braced for teeth. Fen inched closer, shoulders bunching, lips parting just enough to show white fangs. The hall leaned in as one body. Even her own pulse seemed to wait. Then the werewolf made a sound no one in that chamber expected. A wounded, searching whimper that cracked at the end. He dropped. Not in attack. In surrender. Fen folded those enormous legs beneath him and laid his head against her bound hands, pressing his muzzle to the iron until the chain links chimed. Another whimper. Softer now, as if he had found someone long mourned and did not understand how she was here. Silence struck the hall clean. No laughter, no whispers, only fire and breathing. Guinevere stared, unable to move. Heat surged low in her ribs so suddenly she almost doubled over, a fierce pull that felt like a hook catching in the center of her chest and drawing tight. At the same instant, a new scent cut through everything else, precise and undeniable. Storm rain over cedar bark, cold wind over stone. It came from the shadowed soldier by the pillar. Her body recognized it before her mind allowed the thought. Need slammed through her with humiliating certainty. Not hunger, not fear. Something older and more absolute. A silver gold thread seemed to pull from her sternum across the crowded hall toward him, trembling, taut, alive. She looked up. For a heartbeat his control broke. Molten amber bled through his irises, pupils narrowing to the predator's line, and one hand flexed at his side as if resisting the urge to cross the floor and tear the room apart. Then the light was gone. He became merely a soldier again, jaw locked, posture neutral, mask restored. No one announced what had happened, no priest named it, no elder dared, but she knew. The word formed anyway, bright and terrifying. Mate. I am chained in an enemy hall and my body is reaching for him. I hate this. I need this. I do not know how both can be true without breaking me. If he turns away, I survive. If he comes closer, I survive differently, and that might be worse. I have been traded, priced, delivered. I will not beg for kindness. I will not. Yet when he breathed in, even from 30 paces, my whole chest answered like it had been waiting for that exact rhythm all my life. Lachlan rose slowly, eyes moving from Fen to Guinevere to the soldier in shadow and back again. Calculation sharpened his features. Well, he said lightly, our hound grows sentimental in old age. Fen did not move from her hands. Lachlan's smile thinned. Remove her. Covenant purification at dawn. Keep her isolated. 2 guards advanced. Fen lifted his head and gave a low warning rumble that made both men hesitate. Lachlan snapped his fingers once. Fen. Heel. The war-wolf held Guinevere's gaze for a final, aching second, then obeyed and withdrew to the side of the hall, though his body remained angled toward her, as if distance were an order he followed but did not accept. They hauled her up and dragged her through a side corridor into the fortress interior. Stone passages narrowed, air cooling with each turn. She caught one last glimpse over her shoulder. The shadowed soldier had moved from the pillar and was speaking to no one, to everyone, face expressionless, hands still. By midnight they had shackled her in a storage chamber that smelled of old oil, cold iron, and dust. No bed, only a wool blanket thrown on the floor. A single high window admitted a sliver of moon. Outside, bells marked changing watch. At first she sat with her back to the wall and counted breaths, willing the bond sense to fade. It did not. The thread remained, fine as drawn wire, humming whenever she tilted her attention toward the fortress heart. Near dawn, bootsteps and hushed voices stopped outside her door. "Lachlan wants the sigil burned deep," one man said. "Purity mark over the collarbone. Let the whole pack see what tribute becomes." Another voice, female, amused. "And if she screams? Good. Makes obedience memorable." The lock scraped. Guinevere's skin went cold. Two Covenant women entered with a brazier pan and iron tongs. The sigil head at the end of the branding rod glowed dull red, then brighter when one of them pumped the bellows. The symbol was the ash moon spiral crossed by a bar, the mark used on dissidents and breeding stock alike. "Stand," said the older woman. Guinevere did not stand. The younger one smiled and set the heated iron back into the coals. "She will." The breaking point arrived without trumpet or revelation, only with the plain animal knowledge that if she let this happen, she would no longer belong to herself in any language that mattered. Tribute could be survived. Hunger could be survived. Even fear could be survived. But a mark carved to erase choice would become a second chain under the skin. When the older woman reached for her throat, Guinevere moved. She drove her shoulder into the woman's knees, hard enough to topple her into the brazier stand. Coals spilled, hissing. The younger woman cursed and lunged. Guinevere yanked the chain between her wrist cuffs around the woman's forearm and twisted, using all her weight. Metal rang, bone thudded against stone, breath burst from lungs. Guinevere did not wait to see who recovered first. She sprinted through the open door and into the corridor, bare feet slapping cold rock, shackles clashing like an alarm. Shouts erupted behind her. "Stop her! She's heading East Passage." She ran anyway, turning wherever torchlight thinned, following instinct and the faint pull in her chest that seemed to tug left, then down, then left again. Twice, she nearly fell on stair edges worn smooth by generations of boots. Once, an arrow clattered off the wall beside her hand. She kept moving. By the time dawn light began to bleed pale through the upper slits, she had wedged herself into an unused armory cell at the end of a disused gallery, door half-rotted, weapon racks stripped long ago except for rusted spearheads and cracked shields. She dragged a broken rack across the entrance and pressed herself into the corner, shaking so hard her teeth clicked. Outside, search calls echoed and faded, then returned farther off. In the silence between patrols, she felt the bond thread flare suddenly, near now, close enough that her pulse answered before sound reached her ears. Someone stopped outside the blocked door. Then a low male voice, roughened by restraint, spoke through the gap. "Guinevere. It is Marcus. I am coming in unarmed." Guinevere pressed both shackled hands against the stone and forced air into lungs that still burned from running. "If you are coming in," she said, voice ragged, "you do it slowly." "I will." Wood scraped softly as he shifted the broken rack away from the door. "You can see both hands when I enter." The warped door opened inward with a groan. Marcus stepped through exactly as promised, palms visible, no blade at his belt, no spear on his back. He carried a dented canteen, a folded cloth, and a small satchel that smelled of pine resin and clean wool. In the narrow gray light, he looked less like the controlled soldier from the hall and more like a man who had not slept. Jaw darkened by stubble, shirt unlaced at the throat as if he had dressed in a hurry and never finished. The pull in her chest tightened at once, bright as a wire drawn taut. He felt it too. His breath caught once, sharp, then steadied. He kicked the door shut with his heel and lowered himself to one knee several paces away, giving her room to bolt if she chose. "You are hurt. I brought water and salve. I will not touch you unless you say yes." Her wrists throbbed in time with her heartbeat. skin rubbed raw where the irons had chewed through days of travel and one desperate sprint through the fortress. She wanted relief so badly her vision blurred, yet suspicion held like a clamp. "Why would you help me?" His gaze stayed on her face, never drifting to the chain at her throat, never counting her as property the way everyone else had. "Because they will hurt you at dawn if I do not." "They will hurt you if you do." A humorless curve touched his mouth. "That part is not new." For a beat they listened to the fortress breathing around them, distant calls changing watch, boots passing somewhere below the gallery. The bells for first light had only just faded when he uncorked the canteen and poured warm water over the cloth, then set both on the floor between them like an offering. "May I come closer?" he asked. Guinevere swallowed. 2 steps. He took exactly 2 and stopped. Up close he smelled of cedar bark, rain on stone, and iron from old scars. The scent slid under her skin and settled there as if it had always belonged. Her pulse stuttered. Heat rolled through her limbs, not fever, not fear. A deep current rising from low in her ribs and reaching toward him with reckless certainty. "I am not weak because I want comfort. I am not foolish because my body knows him. I am shackled, hunted, and one order away from a branded throat. Yet this man kneels and waits for permission like my pain matters. That should not feel dangerous, but it does. If I lean into this pull, I might never pull free again. If I reject it, I go back to the cold place where I survived by becoming stone. I am so tired of stone. I am so tired of being traded from one set of hands to another while pretending it does not cut me open. If he lies, I break. If he tells the truth, I change." "Do it," she whispered. He moved with careful precision, unfastening nothing, forcing nothing. First the cloth, gentle around swollen skin. Then pine salve, cool and sharp-scented, worked beneath each iron ring with the tip of his finger while he watched her expression for any flinch. Every time she tensed, he paused. Every time she nodded, he continued. When he reached a cracked patch of skin that made her inhale through her teeth, his own shoulders tightened as if he had taken the sting himself. "You were a healer?" she asked, partly to distract herself from how intimate simple care could feel. His eyes lifted to hers. In the half-light, amber bled faintly into his irises, then withdrew. "I learned to bind wounds before I learned to wear a crown." Silence struck between them. He seemed to realize what he had said and looked away first, jaw flexing. "Forget that. I do not think I can." He huffed a dry, self-disgusted breath that almost became a laugh. "I am better at werewolves than frightened women." The line was so awkward and so sincere that a small stunned sound escaped her, halfway between a laugh and a sob. Some locked place in her chest eased by a fraction. From the satchel he drew bread, hard cheese, and strips of roasted meat wrapped in cloth. He tore one strip in half, ate it slowly, swallowed, then held out the rest. "No drug. Same plate I was given." Her fingers brushed his when she took it. A spark raced up her arm and settled behind her sternum where the bond thread pulsed. Marcus went still, gaze dropping to their joined hands. For one suspended heartbeat, the room narrowed to skin and breath and the relentless living line between them. Then voices sounded in the corridor outside, and he pulled back. "Eat," he said quietly. "We may need to move fast." She did, because survival had taught her to take strength where it appeared. He cleaned the last of her wounds, rewrapped her wrists with torn linen, and checked the chain coupler for weak points. "This pin is old," he murmured, testing the rivet with his thumb. "I cannot break it cleanly without tools, but I can loosen it enough that one hard strike might." "Why help me escape if you serve Dark Hollow?" His eyes met hers again, and this time he did not look away. "I serve Dark Hollow. I do not serve Lachlan." A horn sounded in the yard below. Short. Urgent. twice. Marcus swore under his breath and stood in one fluid motion. Too soon. The door slammed open under a heavy kick. 3 Covenant guards filled the frame, ash cords bright against black leather. Behind them came the older woman from the cell, soot smeared across her sleeve where the brazier had spilled, hatred sharpened to a point. There she is, she said, and our loyal soldier kneeling at Tribute's feet. Marcus stepped in front of Guinevere, body turning slightly to shield her. She is under my watch. By whose order? Mine. Steel sang as one guard drew a short sword. Lachlan ordered purification in the yard, now. Guinevere expected Marcus to fight in the doorway. Instead, he lifted both hands, empty, and gave a single curt nod. Then we go to the yard. They marched her through stone corridors brightening with dawn, down a switchback stair, and into the training ground where half the fortress seemed to have gathered. Warriors ringed the packed earth. Covenant devotees stood near a raised forge pan where a branding iron glowed orange-white. Lachlan waited at the far edge in ceremonial black, expression composed, as if this spectacle had always been the plan. When Guinevere stumbled, Marcus caught her elbow and released it instantly, the smallest contact, the smallest promise. She drew strength from it anyway. The older woman took the iron with tongs and lifted it high enough for all to see. By covenant law, tribute is purified and marked. Marcus moved before anyone finished breathing. He stepped between Guinevere and the descending iron and closed his bare hand around the heated sigil head. Gasps tore through the ring. The smell of scorched flesh hit a heartbeat later, but he did not flinch, did not release it, did not break eye contact with Lachlan. Amber ignited in his gaze, predator and king surfacing in the same instant, his voice cut across the yard like a blade striking stone. Blood right challenge, Article 7 of the Mountain Code. Any mark placed on an untried captive under treaty must be witnessed and contested by ranking blood before it binds. A murmur rippled outward, uncertain, then louder. That law was sealed with the old throne. Only royal line can invoke 7. Who told him that wording? Lachlan's expression hardened by a shade. You presume much, soldier. Marcus opened his hand. The branding iron dropped and hissed in the dirt at his feet. Burned skin reddened across his palm, already blistering, but his posture remained carved from iron. I presume law still matters in this yard. Then he whistled once, low and sharp. Fen appeared from the north gate at a run, massive body eating distance in 3 strides. He came straight to Guinevere and planted himself at her side, shoulder against her thigh, lips lifting from his teeth in a silent warning to the entire ring. No leash, no handler, choice. Marcus's next words carried to the highest rail. The werewolf stands with her. If anyone lays a hand on Guinevere Bloodmoon, they answer challenge steel in front of witnesses. No one moved. Guinevere could feel every eye on her, on him, on the bright line stretching between them that no ritual could now pretend not to see. The bond surged, hot and undeniable, and with it came a steadier thing beneath the fear. Not rescue, not surrender, but recognition. He was not saving a stranger out of pity. He was claiming a truth at cost to himself and asking nothing from her except choice. Lachlan descended 1 step from the platform, smile gone entirely. Careful, he said, each word precise. Men have died for less than treason. Marcus turned his head a fraction, enough that Guinevere saw the profile of him against morning light, scarred and unyielding. Then let this be measured properly. For a long moment the yard held on that edge, breathless, violence waiting for one command. Fen pressed closer to Guinevere's leg and gave a low, grieving sound that somehow felt like faith. She lifted her chin, met Marcus's gaze across the narrowing space, and understood with terrifying clarity that whatever mask he wore in this fortress, it was beginning to crack. Whatever mask he wore in this fortress, it was beginning to crack, and Lachlan knew it. The Covenant leader let the silence stretch until the crowd began to shift under its own unease. Then he raised one hand, two fingers crooked in a gesture that looked almost lazy. "Challenge acknowledged," he said. "Pending witness review, the mark is delayed. Tribute returns to holding under armed guard. Soldier Marcus, since you have claimed watch, you will keep it. If she vanishes, your hand will not be the only thing burned." A few devotees protested under their breath, but none stepped forward. Fen stayed pressed to Guinevere's side until Marcus gave a short command she did not catch. The werewolf backed away 3 paces and sat, gaze fixed on her as if memorizing where she stood. The march back through the fortress was quieter than it had been at dawn. Warriors who had laughed in the hall now watched with narrowed eyes, measuring, recalculating. Marcus walked half a step ahead and to her left, placing his body between her and every crossing corridor without making a spectacle of it. When they reached the narrow stairs to the old oath level, he did not hand her chain to another guard. He kept it wrapped around his own wrist. The chamber Lachlan assigned was small, but cleaner than the storage cell, with a shuttered slit window, an iron ring set into the floor, and an old tapestry nailed over a crack in the wall. Marcus tested the ring with his boot, then crouched and spoke without looking at the 2 guards stationed outside. "Key." One guard hesitated. Marcus lifted his head, and whatever the man saw in his face made him hand it over at once. Marcus stepped behind Guinevere. "I am removing the coupler chain so you can sit and sleep without pulling your shoulders apart. Your wrist irons stay. Do you consent?" She stared at him over her shoulder, searching for a trap and finding only intent held on a narrow leash. "Yes." The lock clicked. Weight fell from her spine so abruptly her knees weakened. He caught her elbow, steadying once, then released as if he had touched open flame. No lingering, no claim. The door shut. Bolts dropped outside. For a moment neither of them spoke. The mate thread hummed between them, bright and relentless, and the room felt too small for the force of it. Marcus moved first, setting down what he had brought from somewhere in the fortress: a basin of warm water, folded linen, a jar of salve, broth in a lidded cup, and a dark wool cloak. "The guards will hear if we shout," he said. "They will not enter without my call unless Lachlan orders it." Guinevere's laugh came out thin. "You say that like it should comfort me. It should not." He looked at his burned palm, flexed his fingers once, then set his hand flat on the table edge to keep it still. "It should tell you the shape of the danger." She sat on the cot because standing made her sway. He poured broth into 2 cups, drank from one, waited, then offered the second. She took it, tasted slowly, and felt heat spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the bond. His gaze dropped to the hem of her torn dress, then moved away at once. "There is clean cloth in the satchel. If you want privacy, I will face the door." She waited for the smirk, the bargain, the quiet demand every powerful male eventually made when a woman had nowhere else to go. None came. "Why?" she asked. "You have rank in these walls. You could take what you want and call it treaty right." His jaw tightened. "No law worth keeping grants that right. Lachlan thinks it does. Lachlan thinks fear is governance." The words landed between them with the weight of confession. Marcus turned, presenting his back while she pulled the dry tunic over bruised skin and awkward irons. Even then, he gave her one more choice. "If your hands cannot manage the ties, say so. I will help only where asked." She tied them herself with clumsy fingers and sat again, suddenly exhausted. He finally faced her. The burn across his palm had begun to swell, angry and red. "Your hand needs tending," she said. "It can wait." "No?" The single syllable surprised both of them. Guinevere held out her own hand, palm up. "You take care of my wounds. I take care of yours." He watched her for a long beat, then crossed the room and knelt by the cot. She unscrewed the salve, dipped 2 fingers, and touched the edge of the burn. He inhaled sharply but did not pull away. Up close, his control looked costly, like armor riveted over old fractures. I am sitting on a stranger's cot in enemy stone, salve on my fingers, my chains still on my wrists, and I am learning the line of his hand as if I have always known it. This is not safety yet. This is not peace. But it is not what I was taught to expect from men with power. I was raised to think gentleness was decoration, something spoken in vows and discarded in private. He keeps asking, keeps waiting, keeps making room for my no. I do not know what to do with that, except test it again and again until it either breaks or proves itself real. Part of me wants to run from the wanting in my chest. Part of me wants to lean into it and sleep for the first time in months without one eye open. Maybe trust is not a leap. Maybe it is this small, this stubborn. One wound cleaned, then another, while the world outside sharpens knives. When she finished wrapping his hand with linen, he closed his fingers carefully and gave a short nod that felt almost formal. "Thank you." She looked at the cloth, then at him. "You said you learned wounds before crowns. Was that another slip?" "No." His mouth curved without humor. It was truth spoken at the wrong moment. "What are you hiding, Marcus?" He stood and paced once to the window slit, shoulders tight beneath his shirt. "Enough to get us both killed if I name it now." "That is not an answer. It is the only one I can give and keep you breathing today." The fortress bell rang once, then again, carrying through stone. By the third midday bell, rain had begun tapping against the shutter like impatient knuckles. A knock sounded. Not a request. A warning. Marcus moved to stand in front of her as the bolt lifted and 3 men entered with a tray of food and new restraints. The tallest wore covenant ash cords braided with silver wire, the mark of a ranking enforcer. His eyes went to Guinevere's changed tunic, then to Marcus's bandaged hand, and his mouth twisted. "Comfortable, are we?" he said. "Lachlan orders transfer to lower kennels. Tribute does better near chains." Marcus did not move. "Lachlan can deliver that order himself." The enforcer stepped closer until only a handspan separated them. "Careful, soldier. People are whispering. Warwolf kneels. You quote royal law. You hide in rooms with tribute females and play healer." His gaze flicked to Guinevere with calculated contempt. "Perhaps she already has you collared?" Guinevere felt old shame rise, hot and familiar, and hated that it still found purchase. Marcus's voice dropped to something colder than anger. "Take that sentence back." The enforcer smiled wider. "Or what?" Marcus struck without theatrics, one clean movement that drove the man backward into the stone and pinned him by the throat with his uninjured forearm. The tray clattered to the floor. One of the other men reached for a blade. Fenn's snarl erupted from the corridor, so close it vibrated through the doorframe. The blade stayed sheathed. Marcus leaned in, speaking low enough that the words felt carved, rather than shouted. "Guest right stands under challenge law. She is under my protection until witness review. You will address her by name, or not at all. You will knock before entering this room. You will keep your hands off her chains unless I say otherwise. Nod if you understand." The enforcer clawed at his wrist, face reddening. He nodded. Marcus released him at once, stepping back instead of pressing advantage. "Good. Pick up your tray and leave." The man coughed, rage and fear fighting behind his eyes. He gathered the spilled bowls with shaking hands and backed toward the door. At the threshold, he spat one last threat, thinner now. "Lachlan will hear of this." Marcus tilted his head, and for a heartbeat something ancient looked out through his gaze. "Make sure he hears every word." They left. Bolt slammed. Silence returned in fragments, stitched by rain and Fenn's pacing outside. Guinevere realized her fingers had curled into the blanket so hard her knuckles hurt. Marcus turned to her slowly, giving her space to name what she had seen. "I did not enjoy that," he said. "I know. He baited me. I answered anyway. Because of what he called me? Because disrespect is how men like him test boundaries before they break bodies." The bluntness made her throat tighten. She had heard the same truth in different language all her life, and rarely from someone trying to stop it. Marcus crouched to retrieve the cup that had rolled under the cot. "I cannot promise gentleness from everyone in this keep. I can promise this. While I draw breath, no one touches you without your consent." The vow settled over her like a cloak she had not dared ask for. Not ownership, not pretty words. A boundary stated in plain steel. She rose, crossed the narrow distance, and held out her wrists. "Then help me eat without these cutting deeper." He looked from the irons to her face. Yes. He unlocked one cuff just long enough for her to flex stiff fingers and lift the spoon, then locked it again before doing the other, methodical and careful, each motion announced before it happened. She watched him work and felt the first true crack in the wall she had carried from childhood. When he finished, she did not step away at once. "Marcus." He stilled. "I do not trust easily," she said, voice barely above rain. "But I am beginning to trust you." The breath he released sounded like relief dragged up from somewhere deep and guarded. He bowed his head once, as if receiving an oath. Outside the door, Fen settled with a heavy thump, keeping watch. Inside, with stormlight gathering along the shutter edge, Guinevere took the first full meal she had eaten in Darkhollow, and did not taste fear in every bite. The broth settled warm in her stomach, and for the first time since the hall, she felt the edges of herself return, not as steel, but as shape. A hard knock broke the fragile quiet. Marcus was already on his feet when the bolts scraped. This time 6 guards entered, not 3, with ceremonial spears and ash cords wound high on their arms. Behind them came a narrow man in a gray court robe, carrying a tablet sealed with black wax. "Witness review convenes now," the scribe announced. "By Regency authority. Tribute Guinevere Bloodmoon will attend in chains. Soldier Marcus Darkhollow is ordered to present and stand silent unless questioned." Marcus held out his burned hand. "Read the full order." The scribe did, voice steady from repetition rather than conviction. The language was cleanly crafted, almost elegant, which made it more dangerous. Guest right would be examined. Blood right challenge would be interpreted under covenant purity precedent. Captive status would be clarified for ritual compliance. Every phrase turned law into fog. Guinevere rose without being told. Marcus moved close enough that their shoulders almost touched, close enough for the bond to hum bright and urgent in her chest. "Do not answer quickly," he murmured, pitched for her alone. "Lachlan uses silence as a trap. I learned that young." His mouth tightened with something like grief. "I know." They were marched up 2 levels and across the east gallery to the old judgment chamber, a circular room ringed by carved wolf heads whose stone mouths held iron torches. Lachlan stood at the center dais in ceremonial black, silver ash lines still drawn from brow to mouth. Around him were 9 seated witnesses, 2 war captains, 3 elders, the chief quartermaster, and 3 covenant officiants in gray veils. Fen lay near the rear arch, chain this time, head up, eyes fixed on Guinevere. Lachlan opened his hands as they approached, all courtesy. "Bring her forward. Remove the gag from our law, Marcus. Let her speak where all can hear." "I have no gag on her," Marcus said. "Not yet." A few witnesses shifted. Guinevere noticed the same detail she had seen in the yard. The hesitation was no longer simple cruelty. It was calculation. Some in this room were frightened, and frightened people were easiest to herd. Lachlan began as if delivering a lesson. Darkhollow was built on hierarchy, discipline, and blood kept clean enough to hold command. That order gave us survival through famine and war. Yet now we are asked to accept a blood moon woman brought through treaty after border slaughter, and on the same day our war wolf submits at her feet, while one of our own soldiers invokes dead royal statutes. His gaze slid to Marcus. Patterns matter. An elder leaned forward. State your petition. My petition is protection of pack integrity, Lachlan said. The Ash Moon Covenant has long warned that prophecy lines breed disorder. Blood Moon lineage in particular carries unstable inheritance tied to ancient queen rights that were banned for coercive magic. If unexamined, such blood can contaminate command bonds, disrupt mating order, and invite civil fracture. I therefore request temporary ritual custody for purity verification at the Temple of the Moon Goddess under witness seal. Ritual custody. Pretty language for sacrifice. The words landed like ice in Guinevere's lungs, and a memory flashed, sharp as a knife edge, her mother once whispering over mending, never in daylight, that blood moon daughters were not cursed but feared because they could call truth into light. Guinevere had thought it was bedtime comfort spun from old songs. Lachlan spoke as if it were a tactical threat. Marcus's voice cut through the chamber. Temple custody for an untried captive violates treaty sequence. Lachlan did not look at him. You were ordered to stand silent unless questioned. I am questioning. A covenant officiant rose, veil trembling. Then answer this, soldier. How did you know Article 7 wording sealed under throne cipher? Why does Fen ignore hand signal protocol when she is present? Why did your eyes change in the yard when challenge was declared? The room went still. Lachlan smiled softly. Yes. Let us speak plainly. We have not one contamination, but two. A tribute female of prophecy blood, and a soldier with knowledge and dominance markers consistent with concealed high lineage. If a secret claimant has infiltrated Dark Hollow Command and bound himself to a foreign bloodline, then treason already sits in this room. Guinevere felt the bond flare like a struck wire as Marcus went motionless beside her. Not fear, decision. I can feel him choosing in real time, measuring which truth kills slower. If he reveals himself now, Lachlan gets his public trial and frames the bond as corruption. If he stays hidden, Lachlan drags me to that temple and bleeds me under holy words. I am so tired of men naming my body as risk, resource, vessel, tribute. I am standing in chains while they debate whether my blood is law or plague, and part of me wants to scream until stone cracks. Another part stays very still, because stillness lets me hear where the knives are coming from. I am not prey in a snare. I am listening. I am learning the shape of this trap. One of the war captains cleared his throat. What exactly is purification protocol in this petition? Lachlan answered without pause, as if rehearsed. Ash consecration, rune containment, extraction of volatile inheritance into sanctified vessels, then collaring if instability remains. The quartermaster frowned. Collaring? For safety, Lachlan said. Temporary obedience runes to prevent mass bond contagion while review concludes. A murmur ran the ring. This was the first time he had said it aloud before non-covenant witnesses. Rune collars, not just on captives, but on anyone deemed unstable. Guinevere watched faces change as each person understood the underlying design. Not purification. Control. Marcus stepped forward one pace. Spears lowered around him. You are proposing to collar wolves on suspicion, he said. That is not law. That is ownership. Lachlan finally turned to him, eyes bright with zeal sharpened by ambition. Ownership is what keeps packs from tearing themselves apart. You call it cruelty because you fear order you cannot command. And you call fear a doctrine. Lachlan's smile thinned. I call it foresight. Bring me one generation of collared obedience and there will be no rogue bonds, no rival heirs, no bloodline wars, Peace through certainty. The mountain will kneel to one will and stop bleeding. There it was, naked at last. The eldest witness, gray-haired and scarred, tapped his staff once. Petition tabled until moonrise deliberation. No transfer until vote. Lachlan inclined his head, graceful as a blade being sheathed. As the witness ring wills. Guinevere almost sagged with relief, but Lachlan looked directly at her as guards closed ranks. Until moonrise, he said, voice pitched like silk over wire. Keep her close, Marcus. Prophecy blood is fragile when frightened. By late afternoon, the rain had thickened into a steady sheet that blurred the fortress courtyards into gray stone ghosts. Back in the chamber, Marcus barred the door himself and checked the shutter, the floor ring, the vent slit. Every hinge. Fen had been stationed in the hall outside with 2 handlers and a chain too short for comfort. Guinevere sat on the cot and watched Marcus pace once, twice, then stop with both hands braced on the table. He showed too much, she said quietly. Why now? Because he thinks he can finish this before resistance forms. Marcus turned. He has been building the Ash Moon Covenant for years inside supply chains and priest circles. He places devotees as healers, scribes, quarter clerks, gate readers. Most wolves think it is a piety movement. It is a command network. You knew. I suspected the doctrine. I did not know he planned temple extraction this soon. A beat. I did not know he had forged collars. Her skin prickled. Forged. Silver runes set in ash lacquer, they bind through pain compliance and command phrase. I saw one tested on a rogue in the lower barracks months ago. He obeyed until his voice broke. Marcus's jaw flexed. I reported it up chain. The message never reached the throne council. The throne. The word lingered. Guinevere stood and crossed to him. Then stopped speaking around it. Who are you, Marcus? He held her gaze, and the mask he wore in public looked suddenly thin, almost tired. I am Marcus Vale Darkhollow, firstborn of the royal line. The room seemed to narrow, not because she had not guessed, but because hearing it made every prior danger rearrange into sharper focus. Alpha King, she whispered, uncrowned. My father died last thaw. Lachlan controlled access during succession hearings and framed dissent as border emergency. I returned in soldier's leathers to map loyalties before claiming publicly. He laughed once, low and bitter. Then they brought you in chains, and Fen knelt, and secrecy became a burning house. She should have stepped back. Instead, she stayed where she was, close enough to feel the heat of him, the strain in his breathing, the tremor he hid from everyone else. I was sold to buy peace, she said. Now he wants my blood to collar a territory. I know. I do not want to run. His eyes closed briefly. I was afraid you would say that. Would running save anyone after me? No. Silence folded around them, dense and intimate. Rain tapped the shutter. In the corridor, Fen shifted and gave a low sound that carried like distant thunder. Marcus lifted his bandaged hand, stopped short of her cheek, and asked in a voice roughened to honesty, May I? Guinevere nodded. His fingertips touched the side of her face with reverence that undid her faster than hunger ever had. The bond surged, not a strike of heat but a deep tide rising through marrow and breath, drawing them toward the same center. She pressed her palm over his heart through the worn linen of his shirt and felt it hammer once, twice, then settle under her hand as if recognizing home. I am afraid, she admitted. So am I. Good, she said, a fragile, breathless attempt at steadiness. I distrust fearless men. A shadow of a smile appeared. Then I remain qualified. The humor lasted only a heartbeat. A horn sounded in the lower ward, 3 short blasts, then a fourth. Marcus's head snapped toward the door. That is kennel distress. Fen exploded into snarls outside, chain clashing against stone. Men shouted. Another horn answered from the west wall. Marcus grabbed his knife and moved to the bolt. Stay behind the cot. If the door opens and it is not me, use the stool leg as a spike to the throat. You are giving me etiquette lessons now? Battle manners, he said, and for one instant warmth cut through the dread. Different curriculum. He opened the door into chaos. Two handlers were down in the corridor, groaning, and Fen had torn free of one chain cuff, fur raised, teeth bared at a knot of Covenant enforcers advancing with hooked poles and net weights dipped in black resin. "Stand down!" Marcus roared. An enforcer captain pointed to a parchment held high. Regency emergency order. Tribute transfer authorized under riot protocol. Step aside. What riot? Started in lower kennels. Rogues broke crates. 3 dead. Lies moved faster than truth in stone walls. Guinevere reached the threshold and saw what no one else in that corridor seemed to notice. Ash marks smeared deliberately along the enforcers' necks in the Covenant spiral, crossed by a bar, fresh and wet, as if stamped in haste for this operation. Not emergency response. Coordinated seizure. Marcus planted himself between them and her. No transfer without witness seal. The captain smiled. Seal is attached. He flicked the parchment. A black wax medallion dangled from cord. From this distance, it looked real. Fen lunged, snapping a pole in half. Net weights flew. One struck Marcus's shoulder and burst, splattering resin that smoked where it touched skin. He grunted and ripped free, but 2 more nets hit Fen, and the werewolf crashed to one knee, snarling as the resin tightened like tarred rope. Guinevere grabbed the broken stool leg Marcus had mentioned and drove it into the nearest enforcer's forearm when he reached for her chain. He cried out and fell back. Another seized her from behind with a hooked collar bar, pinning her elbows to her sides without touching bare skin. "Do not struggle," the captain said almost pleasantly. "Ritual custody protects valuable assets." Marcus tore through one net and reached her, eyes gone feral, amber burning through brown. He slashed the collar bar in 2, but 3 spear shafts crossed his chest and throat in a locking X, while a 4th enforcer jammed a rune clasp around his burned wrist. Light flared dull red. His body jerked as the clasp bit. "Challenge me, then," the captain taunted. "In front of no witnesses." Marcus bared his teeth. "Coward." The captain yanked Guinevere's chain hard enough to drag her into the corridor. "Move." She fought for footing, twisting to keep Marcus in sight. Fen was still down, wrapped in smoking net lines, trying to rise. Marcus strained against the spears, muscles shaking, rune clasp pulsing at his wrist. "Guinevere," he said, voice raw and commanding at once. "Look at me." She did. "Whatever they do, do not speak consent in the temple." The captain slammed an elbow into her ribs and pulled her around the bend toward the stairwell. Behind her, Marcus roared her name as the corridor filled with boots, resin smoke, and the sound of bolts shooting shut between them. Guinevere stumbled on the stairs' first turn, chain biting into her wrists, as the enforcer captain hauled her downward into torch smoke and wet stone. Marcus's roar hit the walls behind her, then fractured into echoes as iron gates slammed between levels. Fen's snarls followed, deeper, ragged with fury. And then even that sound was muffled by distance and doors. The captain jerked her forward again. "Keep moving. You are worth more alive than broken." She twisted enough to see his profile. "You keep saying value like it is mercy." "It is arithmetic," he said. They dragged her through a service corridor carved beneath the main keep, past old grain vaults and disused cells where moisture slicked the walls, and ash marks had been painted fresh over older pack runes. She counted doorways by habit, turns by instinct, and breaths because panic would make her sloppy. At the far end, 2 Covenant women opened bronze-bound doors etched with moon sigils scratched over by crude spiral bars. The temple of the moon goddess waited below, hollowed into the mountain's heart. Its oculus stood broken open to the darkening sky, rainwater still dripping from cracked stone into a ritual basin ringed with silver channels. Lachlan had already remade the sacred geometry. Ash lines cut across the old circle. Rune collars sat on a long table like polished traps. 3 wolves in human form knelt near the rear pillars with iron loops around their throats, eyes dull, mouths clenched against command pain. Witnesses filled the side tiers, captains, elders, quarter clerks. Even kitchen hands pressed into attendance so the lie could wear the mask of consensus. Lachlan stood at the central altar in ceremonial black, treaty blade laid before him on dark cloth. When he saw her, satisfaction sharpened his face. "Bring her to the ring." They forced her to her knees inside a chalked boundary that shimmered faintly where ash had been mixed with ground silver. The captain clipped her chain to an altar hook, stepped back, and displayed the parchment again for all to see. Regency emergency transfer, witnessed and sealed. An elder in the second tier squinted at the wax and frowned. Lachlan lifted one hand before the man could speak. Questions after containment. We proceed under riot authority. No riot, no authority, only speed. He began a low invocation in covenant cadence, while attendants lit resin braziers at 4 cardinal points. Smoke climbed, bitter and sweet at once, and the collars on the table pulsed with a weak red glimmer as if listening. Guinevere felt the bond thread strain against stone and distance, a living line pulling toward Marcus so hard it hurt. Then the west doors boomed. 3 strikes. A 4th that cracked one hinge. Fen hit first, smashing through the gap with net resin still clinging in strips to his shoulders, fur dark and smoking at the edges. He landed between Guinevere and the closest enforcer, teeth bared, body shaking with spent sedative and pure will. Marcus came an instant later with a snapped spear shaft in one hand and a blood-wet rune clasp hanging broken from his burned wrist. His chest heaved. His gaze found her and held. "Up," he said, voice raw. "There is a tunnel behind the north apse. We can still get you out." The pull between them surged so hard her knees almost gave. Freedom stood one sprint away, and every survival lesson in her body screamed, "Take it." She shook her head. "Guinevere," he said, stepping into the ring's edge despite the ash hiss against his boots. "If we stay, he uses the witnesses as shields. He has prepared this ground." "If we run," she said, forcing each word through fear. "He keeps the collars. He keeps the doctrine. He buys another treaty woman when I disappear." His face closed on pain. "I can wage war from outside these walls." "And how many girls get chained while you do?" He stopped. The question struck clean because both of them knew the answer. Lachlan laughed softly, spreading his arms to the tears. "Hear her. Noble sacrifice, from polluted blood. This is exactly how contagion speaks, dressed as compassion." Guinevere rose as far as the chain allowed and faced the witnesses. Not him. "Look at the collars. Look at the wolves kneeling by your pillars. Ask who signed those commands. Ask why emergency orders arrive with wet wax and no registry cut." Murmurs rippled. The quartermaster stood halfway, unsettled. "Show me the registry edge." Lachlan snapped. "Sit down." Marcus shifted to flank her left, Fen guarding her right, and the triangle they formed felt less like defense than declaration. Guinevere looked up through the broken oculus. Clouds thinned. A red-edged moon climbed, blurred by remnant rain. "I can leave and live hidden, always waiting for his cult to find the next outcast. I can let stronger people wage this fight and call it prudence. But I know what chains do to a soul when everyone insists they are lawful. I know the silence of rooms where no one interrupts. If I walk out now, I keep my breath and lose my name. If I stand, I may lose everything else. but not that. My mother's whisper was not a bedtime song. Blood moon daughters call truth into light. If that is why he fears me, then fear will finally be useful. She turned to Marcus. The treaty blade. His eyes widened, then steadied. Guinevere. Once you invoke that vow, you cannot soften what it reveals. I do not intend to. Fen lunged as an enforcer rushed. Chaos detonated around them. Spear hafts clashing, witnesses shouting, braziers kicked sideways. Marcus tore the chain from the altar hook with a brutal jerk and shoved the blade hilt into her hand. Lachlan barked an order phrase. The collared wolves by the pillars convulsed and tried to rise against their own will, faces twisting with command pain. "Contain her!" he shouted. "Now!" Guinevere dragged the blade across her palm. Pain flashed bright and immediate. She pressed blood to the oldest stone seam at the circle's center and spoke from somewhere deeper than memory. By the outlawed vow of Queen Isolde Bloodmoon, first keeper of unbound pacts, I call witness not by rank but by truth. Let hidden hands burn visible. Let false oaths break in light. The temple answered. Silver-white radiance erupted from the seam under her hand, raced through the original moon channels, and devoured the ash lines Lachlan had drawn across them. Every forged mark in the chamber ignited. The parchment seal in the captain's hand blistered black and split, revealing blank wax beneath the stamped shell. Ledger scraps tucked in Lachlan's sleeve spilled and unfurled in air like exposed entrails of ink. Supply counts for collars, payment lists, names of bribed scribes, the staged kennel riot order signed with his private cipher. Gasps broke from every tier. The collars on the table flared, then cracked one by one as her bloodlight surged through the old geometry. At the rear pillars, iron loops around captive throats sparked and fell open. Wolves collapsed coughing, then stared up as if waking from underwater. Lachlan's composure shattered. Ash runes blazed across his chest through torn fabric as he half-shifted, claws lengthening, jaw broadening, eyes gone feral with zeal and panic. You would ruin order for sentiment. Marcus stepped forward, voice carrying like judgment. Lachlan Darkhollow, by mountain code and throne line, I offer formal surrender terms. Disarm, release your devotees from command oaths, and stand trial before full witness. Lachlan spat at the stone. Your bloodline is a plague, and she is its womb. Guinevere met him with the blade still red in her grip. No, your fear is the plague, and it ends with me. He lunged, not at her, but past her line toward Marcus's heart, claws aimed to punch through ribs before anyone else could close. Guinevere moved into the arc. Light burst from her blooded palm in visible chains that whipped from floor runes to pillar rings and wrapped Lachlan mid-strike, pinning him hard against the altar columns. Stone groaned. He thrashed, muscles bulging, ash runes burning hotter as he tore skin and cloth trying to wrench free. Marcus took one step closer, hand open, still giving Law one final chance. Yield! Lachlan snarled and ripped an arm loose, shredding the light links at the elbow. He dropped to all fours and charged again with a sound more beast than man. Fen met him in a gray-black collision that shook dust from the oculus rim. The warwolf drove Lachlan sideways, jaws clamped on his shoulder to hold him down without killing, exactly long enough for choice to land where it mattered. Guinevere did not hesitate. She drove the treaty blade straight into the rune core burning at the center of Lachlan's chest. Light flashed white, then went out. Lachlan's body jerked once. The ash sigils across his skin dimmed to dead gray and crumbled like spent charcoal. Fen released and stepped back, flanks heaving, eyes never leaving the fallen man. No command phrase followed. No second wave came. Around the chamber, Covenant enforcers faltered as if a wire had been cut inside all of them at once. For 3 full breaths, no one moved. Then the eldest witness descended from his tier, staff striking stone with measured force. He looked from the broken collars to the exposed ledgers, to Lachlan dead at the altar, and finally to Guinevere standing unbound except for irons hanging open at her wrists. "Record this," he said to the scribe, voice shaking but clear. "Regency fraud, covenant coercion, attempted unlawful extraction, lawful lethal defense under invoked blood vow and witnessed challenge." The scribe nodded, hands trembling as he wrote. Marcus turned to the gathered wolves, amber still fierce in his eyes, and spoke without disguise. "I am Marcus Vale Darkhollow, rightful Alpha King. Lachlan's command is ended. Any wolf who laid collars under coercion will be heard under amnesty review. Any wolf who did so for profit will answer trial." No one disputed him. One by one, then in a wave, warriors and elders dropped to one knee. Guinevere stood in the center of the ruined circle, palm stinging, breath unsteady, treaty blade lowered but not dropped. Fen came to her side and sat, shoulder touching her leg like a vow made flesh. Across from her, Marcus held her gaze through smoke and moonlight and the aftermath of truth, and this time nothing in him hid. Nothing in him hid, and she did not hide from him either. Smoke drifted toward the broken oculus in thin gray veils while the red-edged moon climbed clear above the mountain rim. Around the ruined circle, witnesses began to move again, with the stunned, careful motions of wolves waking from a nightmare. The eldest witness ordered the forged parchment, split wax shell, and Lachlan's exposed ledgers gathered into sealed lockboxes. The quartermaster personally counted every rune collar on the table, called the number aloud, and set them beside the record tablet so none could vanish into private hands. The captain, who had dragged her from the corridor, was disarmed, bound, and placed under guard before he could speak himself into another lie. Marcus took 2 steps toward her, then stopped, as if crossing the final distance required a different kind of courage than battle. Blood from her cut palm still glimmered silver where it had touched the old moon seam. His burned wrist shook once when he flexed it, and she saw him choose restraint again. "May I come closer?" he asked, voice low enough that only she and Fen could hear. Guinevere nodded. "Yes." He came into her space slowly, eyes never leaving hers, and dropped to one knee on the wet stone. The reversal struck the chamber harder than any command. The rightful Alpha King, kneeling before the woman brought here in chains. "Guinevere Bloodmoon," he said, rough with reverence, "I have wanted to tear this fortress apart since the first moment I saw iron on your wrists. I wanted to claim you in the hall, in the yard, in every corridor where they spoke over you as if you were cargo. I did not, because wanting is not permission." His chest rose, fell. "I am asking now, before witnesses, before the goddess stone, before my own wolf. Do you consent to bond with me fully, to be marked by me, and to mark me in return as equal?" The temple went quiet again, but this silence felt different, charged with attention instead of fear. Guinevere lifted her cuffed hands. The broken irons clinked, then slipped free and dropped to the floor, opened by one of the released captives who had stepped forward unseen. She let the metal fall and held Marcus's face between her palms, thumbs rough against stubble and scar. "I consent," she said, "not as tribute, not as rescue, as choice." His eyes closed for a beat like a prayer answered. When he stood, he did not seize her. He braced one hand at her waist, the other at her shoulder, and waited until she tipped her head, baring the junction of neck and shoulder to him. The first touch of his mouth was gentle, almost trembling. Then his fangs pressed through skin with a sharp, clean pain that made her gasp and clutch his shoulders hard. Heat flooded the wound at once, not burning, not harm, but a fierce pulse that traveled through her throat, down her spine, into the center of her chest where the bond thread had lived like drawn wire. The wire became a river. She felt his breath hitch against her skin, felt his control fracture into devotion, felt the exact shape of his fear the night they dragged her away, and the savage relief of finding her alive. Every guarded room inside him opened in one rush. The lonely boy taught to treat wounds before ceremonies, the uncrowned king hiding in plain leather, the man who had practiced restraint until it carved hollows under his ribs. "Mine," he whispered against her skin, voice shaking. She answered without thinking, the word rising from somewhere older than language. "Yours." When he lifted his head, gold light ran through the bond like dawn through storm cloud. She tasted rain and cedar and iron and the wild, clean scent of Fenn's fur after battle. She felt the werewolf's joy as a deep thrum at the edge of their link, heard his mind not in words but in certainty. Pack, home, safe. Guinevere slid one hand to Marcus's nape and drew him down. "My turn." He bared his throat to her without hesitation, pulse beating hard beneath skin. She let her fangs descend and bit over that pulse, not to wound, but to seal. Pain flashed through him and echoed through her in perfect mirrored current, then transformed into something luminous and steady, a shared strength locking into place. The temple's remaining moon channels answered with a soft silver glow, not violent now, simply present, as if blessing an old law restored. "Mine," she breathed into his neck. "Yours," he answered. Together, forehead to forehead, they spoke the final word at the same moment. Mate. The bond settled. Not a leash, not a chain. A two-way tide. She could feel his heartbeat, and he could feel hers. Could sense where her courage sharpened, and where his tenderness unarmed itself. Could reach and be reached without losing the borders of self. He pressed his mouth to the mark she had given him, then touched his marked shoulder to hers in deliberate symmetry. "I see you," he whispered. "I choose you," she said. "I keep you." Fenn rose and came to sit against Guinevere's right side, massive head leaning briefly into her hip before he settled, watchful and calm. Around them, wolves who had once looked away now lowered their gazes in respect. By dawn, the great hall was full again, but this time no one dragged her down the center aisle. Guinevere walked beside Marcus in clean black and silver, her hair braided back from the fresh mark at her throat. Fenn pacing at her right hand with unbound pride. Rain had washed the mountain air clear. Torches burned bright against the carved beams where she had first heard herself named as a commodity. The eldest witness stood before the dais and read the rulings into open record, while the scribe etched each decree into slate and vellum copies. Laughlin's ledgers were displayed one by one, names checked, supply routes exposed. The forged seal shell and blank wax core were passed through the witness ring so every elder saw the fraud with their own eyes. The rune collars, counted at the temple, were carried to the hall forge and melted in full view. The quartermaster announced each collapse of silver and ash lacquer like the closing of a wound. Then Marcus stepped to the throne line, removed the plain soldier clasp from his shoulder, and set the royal torque around his neck. "I claim what I delayed," he said, voice carrying to the highest rail. "Not for blood vanity, for law." He turned to her and held out a circlet worked in dark silver and moonstone. "Guinevere Bloodmoon, will you stand as my equal co-ruler and Luna Queen, with independent authority over sanctuary law, treaty review, and protection of outcasts?" She heard her own answer ring without tremor. "I will." He placed the circlet on her head. The same hall that had watched her arrive in irons bowed as one body. In place of a personal appearance, the eldest witness raised a sealed statement from Elder Rowan Bloodmoon, transmitted under witness order from her birth pack before sunrise, and read his request into record. Acknowledgement of the treaty sale, petition to address Guinevere by name before tribunal, and acceptance of summons when called. His words broke on the inked line of her name, but when she listened she found no words worth spending. She gave formal acknowledgement and nothing more. Some silences were verdicts. The enforcer captain and the two Covenant women from the cell were remanded for trial under coercion statutes. Wolves proven collared under Command Pain were granted amnesty and healing care. Wolves who had profited from collar production were stripped of rank pending sentence. No one disappeared into convenient shadows. Before the noon bell, Marcus and Guinevere signed the new covenant on the same table where tribute accounts had once been tallied. Article 1 abolished living tribute across all mountain packs. Article 2 criminalized rune collaring and command ash. Article 3 established the Moonhaven Sanctuary in the Old East Barracks, with Guinevere's seal required on every intake refusal. Fen pressed one huge paw on the lower margin when the ink dried, smearing it slightly and earning a startled laugh from her that rippled through the front benches like sunlight finally entering a long, closed room. When the hall emptied, she and Marcus remained by the hearth, with Fen sprawled at their feet, exhausted and content. Through the bond, she felt Marcus's steady wonder each time he looked at her, and she let herself rest against him without flinching from need. "We began in chains," she said softly. He kissed the mark at her throat. "We continue in choice." Outside, the fortress gates opened to the first wagons of freed wolves and orphaned children being brought to Moonhaven under guard that was now protection, not transport. Guinevere watched from the threshold, crown light on her brow, mate mark warm at her neck, and when she took Marcus's hand, their joined pulse felt like law made living, shared sovereignty, hard-won safety, and joy that no one would ever auction again.